So earlier today it was announced that Luke Evans would play the role of Dr. Frankenfurter in the Broadway revival of The Rocky Horror Show, and in the hours that have passed, my notifications have been shivering with anticipation. Oh my god, hey. And cheers! For those of you listening on podcast platforms, the pregnant pause there was me taking a shot of tequila in order to get through this conversation, and I mean, it's tequila rose, so essentially poisonous yogurt. Oh, well, it's actually fine. But the sentiment remains the same, both because this is perhaps going to be a challenging conversation about casting and the perceptions thereof and some controversy, but also because it is midnight and I was hoping to get into bed and watch The Celebrity Traitors when it occurred to me that this is probably something I ought to talk about here on the internet. So we are going to discuss the implications of Luke Evans' casting in the role of Dr. Frankenfurter and how it resonates with some feelings I was already having about the role and how it ought to be cast in a Broadway revival of The Rocky Horror Show in the current climate, specifically the current climate where it concerns trans people and the trans community and the vilification of the trans community for political gain by various nefarious parties around the world and the rise of fascism. At which point you begin to understand the tequila. I may take a second shot, I haven't ruled it out. And I approach this conversation as someone who has attempted for some time now to be a very eager and vocal ally to the trans community, especially where that overlaps with the theatre industry. But though I am a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, I am not a member of the trans community specifically, and mine is just one voice in this conversation and certainly not the most important. And if you have thoughts about this piece of casting, I urge you to listen to what I have to say about it and then share your opinions in the comments section down below, where I will remind everyone that we are going to remain respectful. Now, if somehow this is your first introduction to me, oh my god, hey, my name is Mickey Joe, I'm obsessed with all things theatre, and I am a professional theatre critic and content creator here on social media. I'm also stalling for time because I am apprehensive of this one, but I think it's a conversation that we need to have. So let's get started. Here are my thoughts on the casting of Luke Evans as Frankenfurter in The Rocky Horror Show. Let's get into it. So we're going to begin with the news, and I will read to you from the press release, which I received earlier today, which it's worth pointing out, in addition to announcing the casting of film and UK stage star Luke Evans, I believe also gave us our first glimpse at this production's artwork, which is this kind of warped version of the Rocky Horror Show logo, Richard O'Brien's The Rocky Horror Show, to be directed by Sam Pinkleton, over a much torn fishnet tight, which does not at this time tell us too much about the upcoming production from Roundabout Theatre Company, but it's a striking visual nonetheless. Here is what the press release announced. So like I said, film and UK stage star Luke Evans to lead the cast of Richard O'Brien's The Rocky Horror Show, directed by Tony Award winner Sam Pinkleton, Tony Award winner for his celebrated production of the hit Broadway comedy Oh Mary. Creative and design team also announced, and tickets on sale to the general public this Friday, October 31st, which goes some of the way towards explaining why this is being announced right now. It's Halloween. It's a Halloween on sale for The Rocky Horror Show. And if you don't think of The Rocky Horror Show as a particularly Halloween-y musical, then it probably only is because people like to dress up as those characters for Halloween. There is a slight gothic, spooky, subversive vibe, but more so than anything else, we have very few overtly Halloween-adjacent musicals. And you know what? It's also a good time for this Rocky Horror revival to be reminding the Broadway community that they are on their way, because people are getting very excited about revivals this season. One of them just opened, the other one just started previews. I am talking about Ragtime and Chess. There are also, not that they're necessarily considered revivals, but the Broadway tour stop productions of Mamma Mia! And Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Of course, another of this season's most anticipated openings heading into 2026 is also a revival. I am talking about Cats the Jellicle Ball, which in many ways we could anticipate having a decent amount of overlap with the Rocky Horror Show, tonally and in terms of the vibes of the whole thing. Not that we yet know much about this production. We know that it's a Roundabout Theatre Company revival. We know that it is heading to Studio 54. We know it will be directed by Sam Pinkleton, all of which I think is very encouraging. Now, of course, we also know the casting, which points us firmly in more of a specific direction than when we were just speculating. Will it be Colascola? Will it be Jinx Monsoon? What kind of Frankenfurter are they going to go for here? And before I push the boat out on that conversation, here is the rest of the information. The performances will begin on March 26th, 2026, with an official opening of April 23rd. So many high-profile shows opening right at the end of the season. This is going to be a real headache for critics on the ground in New York. It's a limited engagement through June 21st, right after the Tony Awards at Studio 54, as I said, with additional cast members to be announced at a later date. But we do have the creative and design team. So choreography by Annie Taj of Dead Outlaw and of Untitled Dance Show Party Thing with Sam Pinkelton. So another creative collaboration from them. Music direction and orchestrations by Chris Kukul, Beetlejuice and All In, Comedy About Love. Set design by Tony Award nominee Dots. Oh, it's Dots again, who worked on Oh Mary as well as Appropriate/Appropriate. Costume design by Tony Award nominee David I. Reynoso from Water for Elephants and Sleep No More. That's a really interesting connection, that it's the Sleep No More costume designer doing Rocky Horror. I think costume design may be the most interesting element of any Rocky Horror production, because so many choose to stay in the realm of the iconic cult classic film version starring Tim Curry and Susan Sarandon et al. But the last Broadway revival took some different aesthetic direction, so it'll be interesting to see what this one does. Lighting design by Tony Award winner Jane Cox of Appropriate and Macbeth. Sound design by Tony Award winner Brian Ronan of Beautiful and the Great Gatsby. And hair and makeup design, also important, by Drama Desk Award nominee Alberto Albi Alvarado of The Outsiders and Sumo. Now, we do have a quote from Richard O'Brien here, who I got to speak to about the show not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, who said, "It is music to my ears to hear that a cast of very fine actors is on its way to NYC in order to play Let's Dress Up and Make Believe, sing and dance and uplift the hearts of all those who enjoy the gift of free thinking and the pleasure of love." What a Richard O'Brien thing to say. Break out the fishnets and let's have a party. Interesting, and, you know, he's a little rogue, that he's almost overstepping the embargo for this particular release on that one there by saying, "It's music to my ears to hear that a cast of very fine actors is on its way." So interesting to speculate about who else is yet to be announced, who Richard O'Brien considers a cast of very fine actors. I have some theories already bubbling. Sam Pinkelton, meanwhile, has said this: "I'm giddy to crack this untamable classic open with the razor-sharp Luke Evans at the centre, and I hope to do at Studio 54 what the Rocky Horror Show has done for people around the world for decades. Open a dimension to another possible reality. It seriously is the honour of a lifetime to bring the freakiest people I've ever met into the freakiest theatre I've ever been in to revisit the freakiest show there's ever been. No pressure, of course. Rocky Horror is, to me, a sublime, ridiculous, giant-hearted act of love. A trashy little musical that means so many things to generations of tender weirdos with mascara streaming down their faces. I hope we can make something joyous, unfathomable, straight from outer space, and I can't wait to really welcome you into the slimy tentacles of Studio 54. All of which I find overwhelmingly encouraging. This is someone who understands the giddy messiness and depravity of Rocky Horror, but also its capacity for love and community, and the value, I think, of what that means right now. What has had me excited about this Rocky Horror revival is not the rumour that maybe Cola Scola is doing it, which now I think has probably been sizably debunked by this piece of casting, because I don't think there's any other role that Cole would do at this point with the star power that they now have post O'Mary. I think it only would have been Frankenfurter. But no, the thing that's made me excited this entire time is the Sam Pinkelton of it all. I think this is a great combination of show and director that we should really be talking about a lot more. Now, before I tell you why some people aren't thrilled about this casting as well as what I think about it, let me explain, for the benefit of those of you who might not know, who Luke Evans is, because he is originally a British actor who has worked a lot on screen and once upon a time did a lot on stage in the UK. Here is the official bio. Oh, it's lengthy. Luke Evans is a Welsh actor and globally renowned leading man across film, television and theatre. Upcoming, Evans will serve as executive producer and appear as Brigadier Mad Mike Calvert in the espionage thriller film Emergency from the UK-Malaysian label Simpatico. This doesn't mean that much to us. Action thriller film Bear Country. Let's skip to the stuff that the musical theatre fans here are going to appreciate. It's not telling me this, but he was Gaston in the live-action Beauty and the Beast. That's got to be here somewhere. Oh, it's amongst the 25 different films. Pinocchio, Crisis, Murder Mystery, Angel of Mine, The Girl on the Train, The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, The Hobbit, There and Back Again, The Hobbit, and he was in the Hobbit movies, if that wasn't made clear. Most recently seen on stage, he made his return after 16 years in a new play called Backstairs Billy, just a couple of years ago, here in the West End, alongside Penelope Wilton, directed by Michael Grandage, flexing that theatrical muscle once more. I didn't get to see it, but I heard good things. I believe he was playing a queer role in that as well. Luke, who personally came out as a gay man sometime into his career. It doesn't expand within this bio much about the earlier days of his work on stage, but he, I believe, was in the original London cast of the musical Taboo, and also I think he was in one of the earliest casts of Avenue Q in London as well. I'm sure that that's right. Oh, also Le Carver, Miss Saigon, and Rent. Oh, how could I forget the Rent remixed? God forbid that falls out of my brain, and if I've piqued your interest with that one, we absolutely don't have time to get into that right now, so Google it at your own caution. My point is, however, that Luke is clearly known for his work on screen. He is a Hollywood leading man who has the stage experience, and with a role like Frankenfurter, what you need more than anything else is status and presence and impact and star power. It's not a tremendously demanding sing, but it asks an awful lot of you in terms of confidence and ownership and charisma and connection with an audience. It's hard to get past the iconic performance of Tim Curry, who originated the role when Rocky Horror was a debuting stage musical at the Royal Court here in London, where I was yesterday because they're about to celebrate their 70th anniversary. One of the most iconic roles, I think, of his career, and there are a handful since who have done it very well, David Badella being a notable example, but I've also seen a bunch of people step up to the plate and not quite be able to hit a home run. And if you're thinking, Mickey Joe, sports metaphors in Rocky Horror, I have the capacity to surprise you. But let's carry on by talking about whether I think Luke Evans will be able to deliver the goods, as well as what the internet and the Broadway community thinks. Now, I have seen a handful of responses from a notable couple of individuals within the Broadway community, but I'm curious as to what the wider impression is. Let's see if they're talking about this on Reddit right now. They're definitely talking about it in a Rocky Horror Picture Show subreddit. I'm curious if they're going to talk about it on the Broadway one. I want to know what those people think. Oh, we have 107 comments. Here we go. They have my arse in that seat and all the money they want. Don't tell them that because, you know, dynamic pricing will get you. I loved Luke Evans since The Hobbit. I was definitely going to Rocky Horror Picture Show, even if 10 Dogs in a Trench Coat was playing Frank. I don't think you'd need... I think you could get away with 3 dogs in a trench coat in this economy, but this is just too good in all caps. And if the image of the dogs in the trench coat singing Sweet Transvestite wasn't enough for you, then the notion of someone being like, God, I hope they put one of the hobbits in this show is arguably even more fun. Someone said Luke Evans started in musicals, so this is a homecoming. Someone said, cool, but isn't Rocky supposed to be hotter than Frankenfurter? Are they casting Chris Hemsworth as Rocky? At which point it feels like a good opportunity to remind you that you can comment with suggestions down below. Gonna leave that one entirely to you, even if I have names entering my head. We'll carry on. Someone said, I see a Tony nomination in his future if he does this iconic character justice. Do we think people will take the show in or do all the talkbacks like in the movie? A good and interesting question. On the Perpetual UK tour, the audience does do talkbacks. I've seen it a handful of times, and that has always been my experience. Got a lot of hell yeah, hot, take my money. I was hoping for Cola Scola, but this will be interesting. This feels incredibly random to me. I'm not sure I can picture him in the role. Great casting choice, talented actor. Be Still My Foolish Heart. He's so goddamn hot. I am intrigued. So generally positive. And then we have some commentary here that I was seeing the likes of elsewhere. Would have loved a trans or drag actor for this. Feel like they fumbled the bag a bit despite Luke being an incredible actor. Someone else said similarly, was a trans actor not available? It's almost 2026. We thought having a cis man playing a trans character from Transsexual Transylvania made sense. We have the slightly random, he would make a great arbiter in chess. Someone else has said, this is how I found out this actor is gay. I definitely thought he was straight, which for Broadway with this show and role feels off. Not saying straight actors can't play the role, but with a Broadway cast, I'm glad to see it's a queer actor. Sorry, but there were too many straight covers when Hedwig was on Broadway. Some roles are so queer-coded that it feels like a race casting issue, and you should at least do your best to find queer actors. And once more for the road in capital letters with a period after it, hot. So lots of thoughts and feelings there, and it sort of cuts to the heart of some of the, backlash is a very strong word, for just a handful of entirely fair comments and this sort of surprised reaction around this being the casting, especially because there was so much speculation that it was going to be Cole Escola. Largely, I think, just because people could see Cole in that role, and it being Sam Pinkleton. They just worked together for so long on Oh Mary. Cole was doing miscast and was very embedded in the Broadway community, and seemed like they might do that thing of winning a Tony and then coming straight back to lead another show in the next season. It's with Roundabout, it's Frankenfurter. The stars seemed to be aligning that could have been a possibility. We now know that is not the case, and like I said, I don't think Cole is likely to do another role within the show. But what people are saying, including trans and non-binary writers and performers within the Broadway community, is that this role ought to have gone to a trans actor, that it's, Broadway being very commercially minded and being minimally progressive when they cast a cis white man, and not that I think race necessarily need to come into it, but that is sort of how it's being talked about, to play a role that sings an entire song about being a sweet transvestite from the planet of transsexual in the galaxy of Transylvania. And I respect the surprise, and I respect the conversation utterly, and I respect the individuals who are bringing this conversation to social media. However, I'm going to lead uncharacteristically early with my own thoughts here, because I think it's important to bring it into the conversation. Not only is Frankenfurter not explicitly a trans character. I know I said words with a trans prefix about 3 times in the last sentence, but transvestitism and the transgender identity are still distinct concepts. We could argue about the evolving perception of that and whether Frank ought to be considered a trans character by today's standard, the same thing having happened with Hedwig and the Angry Inch, who wasn't initially written to be a trans character and who has now sort of retroactively been perceived as one, even if writer John Cameron Mitchell doesn't necessarily see it that way themselves. The really important conversation I would like us to move towards with the Frankenfurter of it all is, right now, in the political climate, we do not want an explicitly transgender Frankenfurter. I think that would actually be more detrimental than it would be uplifting or celebratory or positive representation. I think it would be distinctly negative representation, and I will explain why. I understand that the position in society for the transgender community is perhaps the most precarious it has almost ever been. There is now this acutely unpleasant focus on transgender individuals in order to score political points, in order to vilify them, in order to create some sense of false threat and demonize them in all aspects of public life. And there has been for some time now considerable conversation about the representation of trans identities and trans characters on screen and on stage, and the way in which we can do that responsibly. It's something that I've been talking about for a very long time, because a little while ago I was asking why we couldn't strive for a trans woman to play a trans female character in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, or that if we couldn't, at least a cis woman ought to be cast in that role rather than a cis man in a dress and a wig. This was a few years ago now, and I actually mentioned Adele Anderson as a brilliant performer who could play the role of Bernadette. I'm very pleased that in the upcoming UK tour of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Adele is indeed playing the role of Bernadette. And Bernadette, not unlike Patrick Swayze's character in To Wong Foo, is an ultimately very maternal and positive character who has the ability to help audiences understand the truth and honesty of the trans experience. Frankenfurter in Rocky Horror is not that. Frankenfurter is a sort of an unashamed sexual deviant who is also a murderer, which is not even really my biggest issue here. My biggest issue is the hypersexualized quality and not even the creation of Rocky Horror. Like, you do you. Everybody has their pastimes, and if you want to Frankenstein together a sexual playmate, then that's entirely up to you. I happen to prefer jigsaw puzzles. But my issue, having seen the stage show multiple times, is heading into the second act, when Frankenfurter, spoiler alert I suppose, this is in the film, pops up alongside Brad and Janet in their double beds, having disguised himself, and he does use he, him pronouns throughout the show, just to point that one out, as their respective partners, only to surprise them with his real identity midway through the carnal activity. Which I will say, in each instance, it is implied that they wish to continue nonetheless, but the act itself is very much framed as one of a repeated sexual predator. But given everything that is unreasonably being said about the trans community right now, I don't think that taking that role and being like, this should be a trans role, this would be more sincere, this would be more authentic if it were a trans performer in this role, I don't think that is a good idea right now. I truly do not think that that is positive representation. I think that plays dangerously into the hands of right-wing, hateful, fascist pundits. I think that would be one of those moments where it would be sort of all that they would need to see, and it would fuel all of the wrong kinds of conversation, and it would feel more like a fetishization in so many ways. And I think, unfortunately, and though nobody has asked for this, one of the real battlegrounds for the trans community is to try and separate the honesty of their identities and lived experience from the sexualization of it all. And Frankenfurter, as a character who appears in lingerie and traps these two young conservative kids and then essentially assaults them, no, I don't think that we need to find a layer of sincerity and authenticity in that particular piece of casting by casting a trans or non-binary performer. I'm sure there are several that would be terrific. I also think that in those productions that have portrayed Frankenfurter explicitly as a drag character with a notable drag queen sort of in their own aesthetic, I think Alaska has played Frank at one point, that it sort of separates him from the nefarious quality of those actions a little bit more. But he remains, at the end of the day, technically speaking, an alien from the planet of transsexual in the galaxy of Transylvania. So any conversation that we're having about real authenticity is also a little bit moot. But what I really want people to consider here is the notion of what Frank has to do on stage and how Frank has to behave on stage, and how that would be perceived by the wrong types of audiences. I don't think we are in a comfortable enough place as far as the trans community is concerned. I think the situation there remains too precarious under the current government, in the current cultural sphere. I just don't think this is a good idea. What I think would be a much better idea is to have trans and non-binary casting throughout the rest of the show. And this is something that Sam Pinkleton has had before in Oh Mary, the character of Mary's, I don't know, is she called Mary's friend or Mary's teacher? Louise in Oh Mary has on more than one occasion now been cast with a trans performer, which is not vital to the role. It doesn't really enhance anything about the character. Fantastic actors have played the role so far, but it's not been a consistent reality of that piece of casting. It also isn't a necessity, but it's that same type of energy that I would love to see in Rocky Horror. Give me a trans Janet. Give me someone like a Dylan Mulvaney as Janet in the Rocky Horror Show to sort of spoof the notion of this conservative, young, idyllic, naive couple. Have them both be played by trans femme and trans masc or non-binary actors. I think that would be cool and edgy and actually far more of a statement than just having a trans Frankenfurter. Do you know what's popped into my head right now? Is the Glee Rocky Horror episode where they had Amber Riley as Mercedes play Frankenfurter just to sidestep this entire conversation. Of course, what I think is really important to see, and what we are already seeing with Luke Evans, is to have queer casting throughout the show. I think that, and you know, I'm obviously going to say that, and I'm not a member of the trans community, I think that is more important than anything else. I do still want for there to be a lot of trans and non-binary casting. Jinx Monsoon as Magenta, I think would be astonishing. Her star is so on the rise right now. She has just done Oh Mary, so she has worked with Sam Pinkleton. She has also worked for the Roundabout Theatre Company last summer in Pirates, the Penzance musical. That had sort of zany casting because we combined Broadway rising stars like Nicholas Barash and Samantha Williams, with veterans like Ramin Karimloo and screen stars like David Hyde Pierce, and of course Jinx Monsoon. If Roundabout wants to bring that same kind of energy to the Rocky Horror Show, I would not be mad at that whatsoever. Put Jinx Monsoon in there, put Dylan Mulvaney in there. And then do you know what else you do? You fill it up with all of the exciting rising star debuting trans and non-binary talent that we haven't heard about yet. There was a line in Sam Pinkleton's statement there about welcoming people into the theatre, and I'm really hoping that in the ethos of the production that he is putting together, that is a big part of it, and that is reflected in the company. I think he understands the significance of Rocky Horror, but I genuinely think that a bigger problem has actually been sidestepped here, and there are going to be better ways of incorporating the trans and non-binary community meaningfully into the cast of this show. I hope so, at least. Now, I do want to share some thoughts here which have been shared on Instagram by the writer Preston Max Allen, whose play Caroline is currently playing at the MCC Theatre in New York, a play which aims to tell a different and more authentic story about trans kids. Preston, around 10 hours ago, shared this: "For many, many reasons, I think Rocky Horror is a property the commercial Broadway industry is completely unprepared and unqualified to touch in this cultural moment. And it's really effing disheartening that this casting choice has instantly proven me right. At Roundabout NYC, you're really going to have a cis man sing Sweet Transvestite every night? Is this really what you think we need right now?" And yeah, there's so much that I agree with there. And I do think inherently that there is a lot to be nervous about the concept of Rocky Horror in the current cultural moment. It also has the capacity to be this riotous moment of queer celebration and indignation and resistance and community. And I don't know that I necessarily feel as disheartened by the casting choice. I don't want to erase the very valid feelings of someone in the trans community, someone in the Broadway community who is expressing their feelings about this piece of casting. I think the Sweet Transvestite lyric of it all is a really incendiary facet of the material, but I maintain that casting that looks like this is preferable to the alternative. I really do believe that. In the next story, Preston ended up in a similar sort of a place that I did, saying, "I hope this production is filled with trans and non-binary artists and collaboration and perspective that explores this complicated historical property in a nuanced, meaningful way." Rocky Horror is a show that is so of its time. It's such a time capsule back to this era in the 1970s, exploring all of these early ideas around gender, and that was clearly influenced by an entirely different culture, and honestly hasn't particularly aged well, but is still really adored. It has this cult status. Preston did say, "I've had good experiences with Roundabout, and I hope they're being extremely thoughtful about this. On its best day, showcasing Rocky Horror when the trans community is being demonized ranges from certainly risky to actually dangerous." And that actually, I think, ties into my bigger concerns about overt casting of a trans performer in the role of Furter, and I think that could represent a far greater danger. So, I don't want the palatable, commercial, Hollywood-friendly version of Rocky Horror that's like the Fox version, which did cast a trans woman in the role. Laverne Cox did it in that one. It wasn't particularly celebrated, nor did it feel necessarily edgy or subversive. I don't want this Broadway revival to be one that's going to make the tourists happy. I want this Broadway revival to be one that feels as much like a riot as the original production did, as the show has the capacity to. I do hope that some care has been taken to tinker with the material, to update the material, and to address some of its sensitivities. Some of it is in the really iconic lyrics, so it's going to be difficult to do. But I have an enduring fondness for Rocky Horror, and I trust Sam Pinkleton, I think, to carve out a gem from this challenging property, certainly in an incredibly difficult time. So my best advice here is that I think we all need to wait to see additional casting. We need to wait to find out what Sam Pinkleton is actually cooking up here. We are only seeing one piece of a jigsaw puzzle. I have faith in this director, and at this time, in this production, that we are going to see something special. We are going to see something that understands the importance of honouring the trans community within this work at a challenging time. I also think all of the energy that could be poured into pushing back against this piece of casting is better served elsewhere. It's better served in uplifting trans and non-binary talent across Broadway. It's better served at continuing to remind people that there is a play several blocks down at the bottom of the theatre district that continues to finance a hate campaign against the trans and non-binary community. And not that we aren't capable of acknowledging multiple problems at the same time, but let's wait to find out whether this is actually something that we need to be mad about. That at least is my perspective, and as always, I would love to hear yours. Are you excited about this piece of casting? Are you planning to get tickets on Halloween? What do you think about Luke Evans as Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Show? I think he could do a really great job. I think it could be part of a really exciting production, but just like with everything else, we will have to wait and see. I hope to be back in New York in the spring to cover this alongside many other openings. If you don't want to miss out on my thoughts, then make sure you're subscribed to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. Turn those notifications on so that you don't miss any upcoming videos, or follow me on podcast platforms. Oh, and I can't believe I made it through the entire video without explaining to you what I'm wearing. It's an apron that I got from the Rocky Horror UK tour, if anyone's been baffled the entire time. The illusion occasionally is sort of eerily good. Anyway, thanks for listening. Share your thoughts in the comments. And as always, I hope that everyone, particularly the trans and non-binary community, is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching. Have a stagey day. Subscribe!